Today, I'm interviewing Levi Rowland, and I'm Brian Cain. And no, this is not an episode of Covendom.
It is not.
However,
I do have the buttons.
Yes, we will be resuming. I know it's like they haven't seen this for a little while.
I know, right? The temptation.
So I think people are all going to think it's Covendom. We will be resuming Covendom. We've got one more interview to do. Levi's going to be interviewing Christian about his book, and then we've already got a plan for season 5 of Covendom, isn't it?
Oh my God, is it?
It is. I think it's season 5.
How much have I given to this man?
A lot. So, and then we've actually got a whole new format for it we're going to try out. So I think it's going to be exciting. Anyway, and it's going to be the 3 of us still. Ellie's still with us. She's just not being interviewed because she doesn't write books. So this is our interview because we write books and you don't. So that's
how he's starting. I love how he's starting.
Anyway, so today, let me tell you a little bit about Levi Rowland, first of all, and of course he can chime in and have opinions of himself, but Levi Rowland is an academic and a teacher, and he is a high priest of Alexandrian witchcraft. He trained with me in the New Orleans coven and runs his own coven, the Pontchartrain coven now, which is the other legitimate coven in the South, really, as far as I'm concerned. I don't count Florida, guys, sorry.
They're their own thing.
Yeah, Florida, like other Southerners don't count Florida as Southern. I know it is technically, but it just isn't really. So
North Florida, maybe.
Yeah, but North Florida, maybe.
Central.
So, yes, there are covens in Florida, and there are witches throughout the South, and there may be covens I don't know about, but at least in our local area, we're the Alexandrian covens that I put my stamp of approval on. You know, his coven may be better than mine. It's not as fun, though, I can guarantee that.
Probably not.
So anyway, Levi is also an occultist, and his book is called The Art Cosmic, and it is a book about traditional astrology, or the magic of traditional astrology. So why don't we first start with saying, what does this book mean to you, and why did you write it?
You made me. No, I'm kidding. So if you're someone who's interested in astrology, which you probably are if you are looking at books on astrology, there are an enormous amount of astrologies, I would say. There's no one astrology, right? There's like a ton of them. And right now what's dominant is sort of a resurgence of modern astrology, right? Which is very much horoscopes and what's your sun sign and are we compatible? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a very vibrant community of people who practice what has come to be called traditional astrology, which is usually, I would say, European pre-modern astrology. That's what they mean when they say the word traditional. What inspired me to write it was that community is amazing. They really are. There's so many amazing authors and practitioners and readers in that community, but their books tend to be so specific and written in such a jargon-riddled way that if you don't have a good footing in the philosophy or practice of it, it's hard to get involved in those books. And then I would say it's also a bit insular. So it's, you know, they don't really want that out. They're not in communion with like the wider occult world all the time. Sometimes it's a very sort of like niche group. So my goal was to create a book that would open you up to not just the nuts and bolts of it, which are definitely in the book, but also the practice itself in a wider sense, like how it interacts with magic, how it interacts with ritual, how it interacts with belief. So that's what inspired me. It was like, we need something to sort of show this and how it can be in your life as a ritual practice for people who do practice and who do care deeply about spirituality or the religiosity behind what they're doing.
Very good. So I also should have mentioned, Levi is also a tarot reader, a psychic, and an astrologist. So that's, you know, that helps. You do charts in the store sometimes, don't you? Yes. He works at Hex here in New Orleans at times. You don't do any freelance work right now.
But, I don't.
But you know, he does it. He does it for fun. It's not even his real job, but you know,
real job. Who has a real job?
I do. I have a real job. I'm a CEO.
That's what he tells us. That's what the business cards say. Like, that's your real job.
So, how did you get into astrology personally?
Oh, I also want to say, before I answer that, I can see comments here. We'll answer questions, and you can call in 309-463-3377. I'll repeat that again a couple of times throughout the
309 Goddess.
Yes. 463-3377 after that.
Makes it easier to remember. 309.
It does.
It's the Covendom phone number.
Yes,
because we're, you know.
But I can see your comments, so you can also feel free to ask things about the art cosmic or astrology or anything we talk about. I'm sure Brian and I don't stay on topic very well, so we could end up talking about, I don't know, the
I'm really good at this, though. At this I do. Because I'm not actually talking. Really.
I know.
I'm just here for eye candy.
He's just here to be the voice of reason.
1-800 blonde bombshell.
God help us all. No. What got me interested in traditional astrology is if you are someone, and I think a lot of people watching this probably are, who's interested in the history of magic or just witchcraft or grimoires or, you know, occult philosophy, you can't avoid it. Like, there is no framework used more often in any of those systems than astrology. Everything is planetary. Like, all of the grimoires are planetary grimoires. I think, well, there are rare exceptions to this, like the Abramelin, but the vast majority of them are. Most of the systems of philosophy at the time that were akin to or influenced the modern occult revival, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, Hellenistic, Egyptian religious ideologies that worked in theurgy, all of them are planetary. Like everything, even angelic magic is often like planetary angels. If you read a Christian grimoire or you're doing anything like that, you can't get away from it.
And the Goetia really
is. The
Goetia
even has like planetary correspondences. That, you know, if you're a demonologist, even the demons have planets. And that's kind of why I was like, I really want to know more about this. You know, that's the big reason. If I had to pick one that's a little deeper, than just, I like to read books about, you know, this weird thing that people were believing in the 16th century or whatever. I think my religious philosophy as an Alexandrian is deeply rooted in a Neoplatonic worldview, that God sort of has emanated, you know, creation. You know, this is different than a traditional Abrahamic view, although I would argue there's a lot of mystics and whatnot that believe it in those traditions. But astrology is a wonderful framework for a deeper spiritual understanding, which is sort of the divinity present in the cosmos, like representing herself over and over again. And I think if you're interested in herbalism or crystals or anything that's popular in the current New Age, you're going to start to see that connection, that interconnection, that emanation, you know, where the God within finds the God without. And for me, astrology is just a very useful and beautiful way to explore that, right? Like, it's a way to explore a deeper truth. You know, I'm sure we'll get into it in the show, but when we'll get into the nuts and bolts of it. But I don't really believe in astrology in a mechanistic, scientific way, which kind of makes me a heretic and makes this book a little heretical in some circles. I believe in it in a much more spiritual way. And so that's the second sort of deeper reason why I really love it.
So in your opinion or in your research, where do you think the origins of astrology originate from?
I think the astrology we practice most likely originates from Sumeria, from Mesopotamia, I should say. So some of our oldest astrological records in the West are in cuneiform. They're in Sumerian and Akkadian, which eventually turns into other languages down the road. But I think that's the sort of heart of it in the West. Other cultures developed their own astrological systems. You know, you have Jyotisha in India, what Westerners tend to call Vedic astrology. That's not really a native Indian term, but they developed that.
There's the Chinese food astrology.
There's Chinese astrology, which is like very, very different than
Year
what we
of
use.
the Rabbit.
Yeah, the Year of the Rabbit, all the years. And they have a whole different elemental system than the West. So there's 5 elements, not 4, you know. And,
what if they have it all right and we have it all
I know,
wrong?
what if it's all, we should have been Taoists. I think my husband would be okay with that. He loves Eastern philosophy. But that's really where it originates, is that people attributed divinity to the stars, both the stars that stayed the same and the stars that wandered, which we know as planets now in modern astronomy. And if you think about it, I mean, it's kind of inevitable, isn't it, that if human beings were looking for something numinous and wonderful, you'd look at the sky, right?
We still are.
We still do, right? Yeah. You know, it's like even secular humanists have dreams of living on Mars or terraforming planets, or, you know, we always kind of had a fascination with it. It makes you feel small in a good way, if that makes sense. But I think if you're asking for the actual roots, it's definitely in Mesopotamia, and then it goes through a lot of development in the Hellenistic world, and then it gets sort of to the point that we would recognize it in Christian Europe.
So when people think about astrology, I think they generally think about their horoscopes.
Oh, yeah.
So could you explain to us the difference between horoscopes, the zodiac, and the planets, and how they all are different facets of astrology?
Sure.
And which is older, and where do they kind of come from?
Thanks to Christian Day, part of the team of Warlock Press, there are beautiful woodcuts in this book, but I'll show you, you won't be able to see it clearly, but this is an example of a horoscope on a traditional chart. A horoscope, all a horoscope is a picture of the heavens for a particular moment. So you might use a different system to make that happen, you might use different houses or the way you organize the picture, but a horoscope is a picture, right? It is a picture of a moment and exactly where everything is in relation to everything else. That's all a horoscope is. In the modern world, most people only know them as birth horoscopes, what we call natal charts or nativities. So like, what did the sky look like? What did the heavens look like when you were born? From the place you were born, right? Because it changes based on where you're from, or where you're born, I should say. But historically, you could cast a horoscope for anything. So it was very common to cast a horoscope for divination, to be like, I'm asking a question in this moment in time, so I'm going to cast a horoscope, and we'll see what the heavens look like, and we'll determine our fate from that. Modern horoscopes use multiple different methods related to sun signs, which is the idea that the most important thing about your natal chart, which we just talked about, is where the sun is when you're born. So if you say you're an Aries or you're a Taurus like Brian is a Taurus because the sun was in the location of Taurus, which don't match the constellations anymore. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But that's why he's a Taurus. And in modern astrology, everything's going to relate back to that. You know, if we're going to read his horoscope, if we're going to talk about his natal chart, it's going to be very, very heavily focused on his sun sign. Trad astrology is not as obsessed with that. But the zodiac is 12 spaces around the earth, right? How the sun travels. We know that, I want to be clear, we know the sun doesn't travel around the earth. I have a better 6th grade science education than that.
The perception of
the perception that it does, right? The perception from
what
Earth.
We're looking at. Yeah.
Watching it travel. These used to be tied to constellations, which is what they're named after. Cancer is a constellation. Aries is a constellation. They have shifted over time due to axial tilt of the planet. But traditional astrology knew that. We've known about axial tilt since Ptolemy, right? Since Claudius Ptolemy. So it's not about the constellations. You know, scientific people love to make fun of astrology. It's not even correct. You know, it's the wrong sign or whatever. That's called sidereal, when you're really obsessed with like the sign is the constellation. Traditional astrology didn't work that way. So the zodiac is the places that the sun appears to travel, and not just the sun, but all of the planets, because as our planet rotates, the sky changes. So we see it differently in different spaces, and those spaces over time took on significant spiritual meaning. Does that make sense?
Yes. Do you have any questions?
We do have one too. There's also people talking about their sun signs, like another Taurus in the room. We are going to talk. I do want to talk about sun signs.
Tauruses are the best sign.
Alvin said, "Can you speak about correlations between, you know, like astrology in a religious sense and witchcraft?" I will say this: I don't think you have to be an astrologer of any stripe to be a good witch or to practice initiatory witchcraft, as Brian and I understand it. You know, as Alexandrian priests, I don't think Gardnerian witchcraft requires it either. I think it is incredibly useful if you're going to work with any forms of magic or tradition that come from the history. And I will say that some of our elders very much did love it. Patricia Crowther being probably the best example, I would say, wouldn't you, Brian?
Well, publicly, she wrote the book. I can't think what it's called right now.
Initiation Through the Signs.
Yes.
The Zodiac Experience.
Yes, you can find it on YouTube. She's got rituals for all the different Zodiac things. But yes, she was the first one to do that.
Yeah, so I would say Patricia Crowther in the witchcraft that we practice, Gardnerian and Alexandrian, being closely related, she's probably the elder that had the tightest relationship to astrology in her public life. But I will say, you know, Brian and I have had the pleasure of meeting lots of elders and teachers who are initiates around the world. Almost all of them have some knowledge of planetary magic at the least. How we organize magic, how we organize spells. There is a tendency, I would say, to fall back on planetary correspondence.
I think it's the evidence is there that, well, we know for a fact Alex did.
Yeah.
But Gardner as well were familiar with the Key of Solomon. could you tell us how the Key of Solomon plays a role in the occult astrology going on today?
Oh, yeah. All of the grimoires, but the Key of Solomon being the most read in continental Europe and Britain, definitely has the biggest influence on a lot of the modern occult revival. It's often the only grimoire people had access to that had some meat to it. You have little tiny grimoires that are really popular, but they're kind of like, they're a little flimsy, to be perfectly honest. They're like spells on how to find a lost key or whatever, and they don't have much more going for them. But the Key of Solomon is wildly popular in the modern occult revival, and it is deeply planetary. All of its seals and sigils are based in an understanding of planetary magic. So I don't think you can go, I mean, I'm actually pausing because I'm trying to think. I don't think I can think of any movement tied in any way to the modern occult revival that is not astrological on some level.
No, that was actually a huge eye-opener for me, that one day that dawned on me. Pretty much all ceremonial, what we would call ceremonial magic or the work of the magician, is always astrologically based, whether it's the planets or something else.
Or the time that they work, like the hours, the planetary hours.
I mean, every single system.
I mean, they thought the planets were angelic, right? It's like angelic intelligences in the universe, and they associated them with archangels, which is detailed in the Art Cosmic. I have a whole chapter on angels, like the concept of angels and astrological magic. So yeah, Alvin, that would be my answer.
What do you think about, we talk about the angels and all that. What about the gods?
I mean, the planets are named after gods, right? So, and I think there are callbacks to that. For example, Jupiter, one of the sacred herbs of Jupiter in almost every grimoire you read, or almost any work of ceremonial magic, is oak. Wonder why? Well, because oak was sacred to Jupiter. It was sacred to Zeus. His oracle at Dodona in Greece listened to the rustling of oak leaves. That was how, the oracle, the Sibyl, prophesied. And I think you see it with Venus, where myrtle is, a sacred herb associated with Venus. Well, that's a tie back to the goddess Venus herself in Rome and the goddess Aphrodite in Greece. And they are named after actual Hellenistic deities. So there's absolutely a pagan correspondence as well. You don't have to solely be angelic or use Hebrew god names.
These days we're supposed to say pre-Christian peoples.
I'm going to say pagan. It makes, I don't know, I kind of like the rebellious nature of it.
And the days of the week are also named after gods.
Yeah, the days of the week are named after gods.
Do you think that had I know that was a Germanic, Norse. Mm-hmm. Do you think that had an astrological significance to them?
I do. I think there's a reason that, Romans had this thing where if you read a lot of Roman sources, when they were talking about a foreign people, they often would not bother to learn the native or indigenous names of those people's gods.
They just called them pagans.
They would just call them whatever the Roman god equivalent was.
Yeah.
So there's lots of Roman texts where they'll be like, they worship Mercury a lot. Of course, no one worships Mercury in the place that they're talking about. They're talking about, Lu or whatever, depending on that particular culture. So it's that old pagan way of like, oh, I worship the thunder god under the name of Jupiter. You worship the thunder god under the name Thor. And yeah, so do I think there's a heavy correspondence? Oh yeah, for sure.
So do you think the Romans created that correspondence for them? Do you think they had their own?
I think the Romans were probably a little bit more intense on it. I think there's evidence of astrological magic in almost every culture, but I don't think it's going to be exactly the same as what the Art Cosmic's talking about or what ceremonial magic's talking about, because that's firmly rooted in Christianized Hellenism. Like the ideas of Greek thought, Hermeticism, all of that, and then filtered through Christianity. I don't think we could reconstruct it perfectly as to what they thought about Jupiter, unless we have texts like we do from the Sumerians. But we don't have as much astrological knowledge from like the Celts, for example.
Yeah, not much at all, really.
Yeah, very little.
And I think,
I know, there's always like anything you have to be so careful with Celtic stuff.
Yeah.
Guys. Like,
how much of it's reconstructed.
And how much of it was like 19th century Celtic nationalism.
Trees have brains. Trees have brains.
Trees have brains, everyone. You heard
so this is something I've always been romantically curious about, is the relation between the 12 zodiac and the 12 gods of Olympus, or the 12 gods of Rome.
That was a thing, actually. I think I give a resource for it in the Art Cosmic, which is, it was the Tetrabiblos of Ptolemy, No, I'm sorry. I misspoke. It's, I'd have to look it up. But yes, it is a common practice in Hellenistic astrology to associate the dodecatheon, or the 12 gods, right, with zodiac signs. And you can, Manilius, that's where it's from, the Astronomica by Manilius, I remember it. He does that. And you can find other sources that do this, but it was a common thing where they would associate the path of the sun.
This is mean. Can you actually name them for us?
No, I cannot.
Okay.
I don't have them memorized.
I won't be able to either.
Right? I don't have them memorized, but you can look it up.
A couple of them, maybe we could guess. But
Manilius' Astronomica. They're really weird, though, because the Romans had developed this system of pairing deities, like and that is like they're trying to do it astrologically, the way a horoscope would have kind of worked out. So some of them do feel a little
off for us,
or forced or whatever. But yeah, no, it's definitely a thing.
Very good. Very good. I know we had an off-topic question about Alexandrian covens in Pittsburgh. I don't know of one personally. I can't say they're not. They're there. They're not. I don't know.
I don't either. Sorry.
I could try to find out, but I don't know anyone in Pittsburgh. I
can look it up.
Sounds like a place for Gardnerians.
Is that what you're just going to say whenever you can't remember one? You're just like, I'm so sorry, it's all Gardnerian.
It's all Gardner. I'd have to look to see what's close. Yeah. Anyway, so the art cosmic. So one question that I really wanted to ask you is, how can this book benefit a new practitioner of astrology? You know, what if you were going to say, this is the one thing I want you to take away from this book, or what your message was, what your target audience was?
Absolutely.
Even if it's in layers, like I know for mine, I kind of had it. It was for beginners, but there were a few things for initiates.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure. Yeah. The biggest thing that I hope people could take from this if they read it was this. I know astrology is wildly popular right now. I don't have any friend, even if they're secular, Christian, not interested in the occult. It doesn't matter. Everyone is like, knows what their rising sign is nowadays, which 20 years ago, you didn't. 20 years ago, people knew their sun sign, maybe, and that's about it.
Yep.
Now everybody can tell you where their moon is, and there's tons of memes all over the internet about, like, I don't know if you've all seen that meme where it's a man texting his mother.
And how do we know so many triple Scorpios?
Yeah, we know so many triple Scorpios.
So bizarre.
But there's a meme where it's like, Mom, what time was I born?
You never hear anyone say, I'm a triple Taurus.
I know, right? Mom, what time was I born? And the mom texts back, get away from her. Because it's like some witchy girl who's like trying to read his natal chart.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's like meme culture has exploded around astrology. My own workplace, I have colleagues who talk about astrology all the time. But what I hope that the art cosmic offers, because I know I'm a small niche voice, right, in this world, is there is a deeper side to it. And I think contemporary modern astrology, when it's divorced from that deeper side, frankly, is not very helpful for your life. I don't think there's a lot of wisdom to be gleaned from some of this modern astrological thing. I know that sounds judgmental, but it's so disconnected from any sense of like the spiritual vision of the cosmos that exists in a lot of these older systems, that it almost gets a little, frankly, silly, when it's like, I can't date him, his moon's in Scorpio. It's like, what does that even mean? It's like, so is everyone's moon who was born in that hospital.
I would be very apprehensive if somebody told me they were a Gemini.
That's fair.
I have to say that one would creep me out a bit.
Everybody's allowed their astrological
I've
prejudices.
dated two Geminis, and they were both kind of scary people.
But that's what I hope people take from it, is like, look, if you just want to read your horoscope on an app on your phone, and you don't really care, that's fine. But if you do feel drawn to this in some way, I wanted to provide for people this knowledge that, like, it's actually quite deep. It's actually quite beautiful. There's an enormous amount of art and literature and poetry and ritual magic, around this concept. And I can't give you an encyclopedia about it because it would fill up this entire room. It's thousands of years of history, but I can give you a taste of it, of how to make it something that is a magical practice, a spiritual practice, something that is larger than just mechanistic. I personally, and I want to be very clear, this is a minority opinion amongst astrologers. I don't think astrology is a mechanistic science. It sort of makes me cringe a little when people say astrology is a science. That was true before the Enlightenment. That was true before empiricism. It is not true now. That's why I didn't call this the cosmic science. I called it the art cosmic. You know, because I do think it's an art akin to magic or akin to religious practice. Or maybe I could kind of, you know, give a wink and a nod to a spiritualized psychological experience, a Jungian psychological experience. What it is not is there's no, like, I'm trying to think of a way to put this that's not too, okay. The planet Mars is not emitting a magical, invisible, special ray that makes people angry. Like, you know, like, I can't believe that. It's the 21st century. We know too much about astronomy. Like, it's like, that's not, if we're going to cling to that, then we can throw this in the dustbin, right? And so I wrote the Art Cosmic to be like, yeah, astrology doesn't really teach that. Yes, a handful of ancients might have believed that there were magic rays coming out of planets. I'm looking at you, Claudius Ptolemy. But like, there's a deeper system at work here. And exploring that, I think, leads to a lot of amazing insight and some really cool magical practices too. That where you don't have to start arguing about, like, there's so many tweets where people are like, astrology works because we're mostly water and the planets pull on water like the moon. And I'm like, do you understand like how far away these planets are from Earth? Like, they do not like impact.
Well, you know, some of the luminaries weren't planets to begin with, like
exactly.
the sun.
The sun is, you know, we call it a planet in astrology. It's not a planet.
It's not a planet.
I do think it, you know, it's pretty important for life on Earth. But
it is shooting rays at you, though.
Yes, it is.
The sun is shooting the rays at the.
But we can measure that. It's like we can measure solar radiation. We can't really measure the magical ray from Jupiter that makes you better at getting money. Like, you know.
So tell me something about astrology that you dislike or a pet peeve.
A pet peeve? Obsession with sun signs. That's something that's not popular in traditional astrology, but it is enormously popular in modern astrology. Your entire personality is not your sun sign. No astrological tradition believed this. This became popular much, much more recently than people think. It became popular in the 60s.
The newspapers.
Yes, because of newspapers. It became popular because of periodical horoscopes, and we needed a way to organize them quickly. I actually write about this in the Art Cosmic and quote quite a few historians who've written about the history of astrology. It's not part of historical astrology. In most European systems, your rising sign was way more important.
I was just going to ask that, because I've been encountering that more and more recently, that people say magically your rising sign is a bit more important.
Yeah, there are many, but the big takeaway for traditional astrology is you are the whole chart. Mm-hmm. You know, there is no such thing as like, if you're a Taurus, that's your whole energy. Because like, you're a Virgo rising, right?
I'm a Taurus, Virgo rising, Cancer moon.
Cancer moon. All of that matters. And not just that, but where all the planets are, where the, you know, if you use the nodes, if you use the, other astrological bodies, the fixed stars, which I get into in the Art Cosmic, all of that's like a big deal, right? You know, it's like you're not just your sun sign, like this idea that all Scorpios, so everyone. And
there's a lot to remember if you really knew your chart.
I know. Yeah. So everyone born around Halloween is exactly the same? Really? Like, that's not a functional worldview. Like, I mean, like, you could disprove that in 6 seconds. You know, I think people inadvertently make it foolish. And that's my biggest pet peeve is like, you don't have to do that. You know, it's a choice to step into the world of, you don't get to say it's a science. And then when science comes out and says, okay, well, we're going to disprove everything you just said. And you don't really get to get mad, do you? Because like,
I don't know if the magical community is really big on facts, Levi.
No, they're not. They should be.
I could go on my Wicca ramble,
I know,
but
right?
It's not that you'll hear that later in Covendom 25 more times.
So we do have a question from Ashton about the difference between, you know, he's noticing a lot of shop owners and even people who call themselves witches don't know the difference between horoscopes and horary astrology, a very unfortunate word, horary, H-O-R-A-R-Y. A horoscope can be cast at any moment for any place, as long as you have an ephemeris or you can figure out where the planets are. So horary astrology is a form of divination, right? Your natal chart is what the sky looked like when you were born. You could also cast a chart for the birth of a business or something like that. But horary astrology is a form of divination. There's a whole chapter on it in the Art Cosmic on how it works and an example chart as well on to use interpretive techniques from traditional sources. But a horary experience is where it's almost like a tarot card reading or a rune reading. You're going to sit down, you're going to ask a question, you're going to cast the chart, and based on that question, you're going to look at specific things. In a lot of horary technique, you look at the moon for the person, not the sun, which, is a shock for some people. And then you look at the conditions of the things that relate to what you're asking. So if you're asking about money, maybe you'll look at the second house, or you'll look at, planets like Jupiter for beneficence, or, things like that. But it's a form of divination. It's not a form of birth reading.
The day of the bird reading.
The day of the bird.
Dead bird reading. Dead
like
bird
augury? They did used to love reading birds.
No, I don't want to take up the spaces show, but Christian misunderstood a woman with a heavy accent once, and she was asking him about dead bird readings. And at the end conclusion, he realized she was saying the day of the birth.
Day of the birth, not dead bird. Because the Romans actually did read a lot with birds.
Yes, that's what he thought. That's what he thought she was talking about.
Yeah, augury. Yeah. Horary astrology, I will say, is very potent. It's a fun way of doing divination. It's a powerful way of doing divination. If you've never done it, I highly recommend it. It's sometimes a lot more involved, I would say, than like a tarot card reading.
So I have a question that I am not going to be able to articulate extremely well, because it's been months and months and months and months since I looked at it and talked to you about it. So it's half in my brain, but it was a subject that I found very fascinating. So, and I do believe we're talking about, it is Claudius Ptolemy is the one. I think I'm talking about him. I just called him Ptolemy. But I'm not saying he was responsible for it, but he had a system of traditional religious astrology that when I studied it, in a lot of ways, it seemed more witchcraft friendly than what you encounter today. Oh, yeah. And it gave you different, like under his system, I had like a completely different mix of things. I can't remember what they were right now.
Yes.
Do you want to?
So
most people may not have heard of this, but you want to tell us about that, and why was this major? I mean, this is in the Hellenistic times, obviously, yep. Right? So where did divergence? How did we lose that information and get to where we are now?
So Ptolemy has a weird one that's actually not used a lot.
I really liked it.
I know. The way you organize a horoscope differs based on the system you use. And the big thing that changes the most are the houses. These are not related to the zodiac signs. The houses are a way of dividing the chart into 12 places, right? 12 houses. And different astrological schools or philosophies or systems will differentiate those according to their own beliefs. Some of the most popular ones are the Placidus system. Often people say Placidus. The Regiomontanus system, which was very popular in Renaissance astrology. A lot of traditional astrologers, myself included, use whole sign houses, which means that whatever your rising sign is, let's say your rising sign is Virgo, like Brian, then the first house belongs to Virgo. And then the second one follows the sign that follows Virgo, and the third after that, and it continues, right? That's whole sign, right? Which is what I use, and it's very popular in a lot of traditional astrological systems. But how you divide the houses will change what Brian's talking about.
And his planets were different too, right?
How he interprets them and stuff. Yeah. He has the Tetrabiblos, which is, massively influential text in traditional astrology. But how we divide the house system is very different. So you kind of have to do some research and figure out which one you want to use. But I use whole sign houses.
I don't play with none of that because I'm just a witch, not a scientist.
I'm not a scientist either.
Houses have never really quite made a whole lot of sense to me. But your book does make it very applicable. How could how do you apply astrology to your daily life, and how do you think other people can do it in a realistic way?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. Number one is it's a tool. It's a divinatory tool. Astrology is divination in most cases. People did not get their natal chart done a lot in the ancient world unless you were rich. It was very, very hard to do because very few people who did not have wealth and name knew their time and date of birth perfectly, right? So the charts were going to be wildly inaccurate anyway. Most people who are reading charts in the ancient world and through the pre-modern world in Europe are reading horary charts. They're using astrology for divination, which I actually think is better sometimes. I think natal chart reading can be very fraught. So I think one of the best ways you can use it is divination. And why I think it's such an excellent tool is it really takes you outside of yourself, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. A tarot card reading can be very therapeutic. I give tarot. I love tarot, not a judgment. but it really gets you out of your own head and sees you in this larger matrix. You know, traditional astrology is not like modern astrology. Modern astrology is based heavily on psychoanalysis. You know, and there's a whole chapter in the Art Cosmic that addresses this. Modern astrology looks at the horoscope and says, this is all you. So the second house isn't about your money, it's about how you feel about money. The eighth house is not about your death, it's about how you feel about death, right? The seventh house is not about who you're going to marry, it's how you feel about marriage. It's all you. It's incredibly egotistical and self-centered. Traditional astrology is a pre-enlightenment worldview. It views you as a member of a community, a person in a world, a person in a kingdom or a country or a nation, you know, in a religion. You know, it places you in all of these communities. And I think if there's one thing astrology is incredibly good at, that other forms of divination struggle with sometimes, is getting you out of your own head. You know, how many times, I'm sure we've got people in the comments who are readers, how many times have you been given a reading and they cannot see the problem from a bigger perspective? They can't see themselves in relation to other people. They're almost like trapped inside their little tiny world. Astrology, in the traditional practice of it, doesn't do that. It can be, frankly, quite fatalistic. And I think that's a good thing. I think sometimes the concept of fate can shake you out of choice anxiety. It can shake you out of egotism. It can say, hey, this isn't about you. Like, you know, this is about a lot of things that are connected to you, but you are not the center of the universe, right? You know, and that's how I think you can apply it in your day-to-day. It's like you can make your divination, it can break you out of choice anxiety, and it can break you out of ego, because it places you in such a larger system of correspondence than tarot might, or runes, or things like that, which can get very interpersonal. Not that they're better or worse, they're just different. So that's how I would say that. The second thing I would say you can use it in your life is magic. The subtitle of this is the magic of traditional astrology. If you're crafting ritual, if you're crafting practice, astrology is just a really great framework. I mean, every grimoire, it gives you so many options.
And it is connecting you to nature. I mean, cosmic nature.
Yeah, cosmic nature, right? Yeah. Well, that's a whole thing. I'm so glad you said that. Traditional astrology also takes into account the natural world. The example I always use is, what do you associate an Aries with, Brian?
A ram.
What else? Like, if a person is an Aries, what are they supposed to be like?
Fiery.
Yeah, fiery, passionate. Yeah. Why?
Because they're crazy.
But like, that's the question I always ask astrology peeps is like,
no,
why?
Actually, the Aries I know, and Christians are rising Aries, they're my first teachers in Aries, they're very outgoing personalities.
Yep. But again, why? Why is that part of the sky? You know, it's like, well, it's the spring equinox.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, makes sense.
You know, and Scorpio is fixed water, right? It's fixed water. It's ice. Why? Because it's the reaping, right? It's Halloween.
Seasonal. We forget that sometimes.
We totally, and this is, of course, from a Eurocentric perspective.
Just like I would be May, which makes so much sense, really.
Yeah, Taurus is May, ruled by Venus in the spring, right? Late spring, right? Breaking into summer, May Day, all of that, right? So you get that. Traditional astrology always takes you back to a wider space than yourself. So it's the seasons, it's the community, it's the gods, it's the angels, it's something larger than you. And so, and also that second point I made, that makes your magic potent too. Sometimes I think people struggle with magic because they can't let it go. Mm-hmm. They're knitting their fingers into it so much that
they become obsessed with it.
And you can't get anything done. Mm-hmm. I think that's why a lot of ceremonial magic is like, give it to the angels.
Yeah.
They take it away.
Eventually you got to let it go.
You got to let it go, yeah.
You know, I mean, I think some people think you have to do it over and over and over and over and over again. And that ties you into it. Whereas if you're giving it to a higher power, you eventually let it go if you trust in that. But, you know, as I just quoted recently, magic is as simple and as complex as people.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think astrology can be the same way.
I do too.
I did have a question. It left my mind now, but there was a good one in here.
Yes.
I saw, but before I get to that, have you read it because I can't see it from here. Once again, we have a number if you want to call in and ask Levi a question and hear your own voice, and then we could find out if the phones work. It's 309-GODDESS, 309-463-3377, 309-GODDESS. Please call in with a question. We've still got 20, 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
But we've got a great question in the comments.
Got a few great questions, actually. One of them is it possible for an astrologer to understand astrological systems without understanding the locale or culture where the system comes from? This is an excellent question, because it's even more important of a question than that, because some systems don't work outside of certain parts of the planet. There are certain house systems, for example, that if you're too close to the equator or too close or too far to the poles, it will be wrong, right? It won't function correctly. I think it's very important to realize that these are systems that were born in Europe, right? That's what I'm writing about. And so sometimes they don't function in other places. And so I always tell people, and, at the risk of anybody can use this book. Let me say that as a caveat, anyone, no matter where you live in the world. But for some places, I do think it would be more beneficial to maybe use my book to get into the magical side of astrology. But if you're getting into the technical side, to look into local culture and what the sort of celestial wisdom is there, Vedic astrology in India, Chinese astrology in the East. I think there's a lot of interesting astrological things that come out of Mesoamerica. They're not necessarily predictive in the same way as European astrology, but they're all relating our relationship to the heavenly bodies in unique ways. But I actually do kind of think the locale matters, and that you should think about that a little bit when you're adopting a system or getting into it. So we have two down here from Susan, but really I'm going to condense because it's kind of the same thing. The big question she asks is, can a planet's position be so strong in a chart as to make it impossible for one to change the effect? And it relates to her other comment about how astrology informs a trajectory in life that we can work with or against. So this is a concept that I struggled a lot to write about in the Art Cosmic, which is the concept of fate. I think it strikes a lot of people when they read traditional astrological books, like Claudius Ptolemy, like Manilius, like a lot of people from history that we could name here, and that are sourced all throughout the Art Cosmic, because they are almost like shocking. Because if all you've read is like modern horoscopes, which are like, really think about setting your intentions correctly today, because it's the day where you're going to have a lot of your past traumas brought up. It's like always like that, right? Yeah. Which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm being a little mean. But in the Art Cosmic, and I'm hearkening back to a lot of texts that if you just went and read without the kind of knowing about them, they say things like, if your chart looks like this, you're going to die of cholera. Or like you'll get another chart and it'll be like, portends the death of many children. Or like you'll read another one. I mean, they're all like this. It's just like litanies of like this very fatalistic, like, will have a tendency to put on weight and die from dropsy. It's just like, they're very fatalistic, they're very direct, and they deal with concepts of death and war and famine and things like that a lot more.
Things you might need to be warned about.
Like, it's like portends death in the face of a great nation or whatever. They're very, very dark. And I have a love affair with fate. I have a absolute love of fate, and I know that's a weird thing to say as a witch, because I believe I can affect fate, right? That's what the whole practice of magic is for anyone who practices it, regardless of initiation or tradition. But I think fate is a beautiful concept when it's approached correctly, and I think our modern desire to do away with it is dangerous. I think we are crippled sometimes. That's kind of an ableist expression, but we're very much sort of damaged by this need to always be in control, right? There's nothing you can't control. Go forth, do. You're perfect. It's all your will. It's all your intent. It's very Nietzschean, right? We're all Übermenschen. And I don't like that. I think it's very, very unhealthy. I think it divorces you from community. I think it divorces you from the fact that you are going to face things you can't face. I mean, there are parts, I'm not going to obviously break any oaths here tonight, but there are parts in our own liturgy that talks about things the gods can't do, right? It's like that are just the laws of existence or being. And those are in our liturgy, even as witches, to remind us.
And I did instantly know what you were talking about.
I know, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Every witch who's who's listening does. There are parts where it's to remind you, you are still a creature, right, in a world, and it will affect you. And I think, so I'm getting very broad, but Susan, to answer your question, I think if you're not comfortable with fate, trad astrology is a little rough sometimes. I will just be honest. I think it is.
I don't know the exact definitions, but there are people who believe in fate, people who don't believe in fate, and people who have a mixed bag of chips.
Yeah.
Some things can be fated, and some people believe it's only the really big things that are fated. But, yes, we do believe we can bend, shape, and change fate as witches.
I love that word, though. Even the original word witcha, that there is that one etymology that links it to bending, right? I think if fate is a tapestry, right? If our existence is a great tapestry, we're not completely reweaving the tapestry. We're pulling the threads, right?
Sometimes the wrong ones.
Sometimes the wrong ones, right? And then the whole thing just looks ugly, and well, that's on you. But no, I think that's very true. And I think traditional astrology does have a belief in fate. And I think, isn't there a part of you, honestly, though, and by you I mean all of you, y'all, I don't say y'all, but isn't there a part that there is sometimes it's comforting? It's like that quote in Shakespeare, the fault lies not with us but in our stars. That is a beautiful concept sometimes, because sometimes you don't get an answer, right? And if you can't accept that, you're not going to heal psychologically from trauma. And I think our ancestors understood this. And so sometimes they would look at somebody dying in a horrible way, or somebody who died young, or a nation falling, or a plague, and they could not necessarily process it by trying to figure out every single thing that created it. So sometimes it's just in the stars. You know what I mean? It's just in the stars. You were born under a bad star. And as dark and fatalistic as that can be, it's also relieving.
It's fate.
It's fate, right? It's relieving.
I love that scene in Vikings where I think Helga, the blonde one.
I don't watch
Vikings. Whatever. Well, she's divorcing the main guy. And he's like, why are you leaving me? And she just looks at him and she goes, it's fate. And, and he was like...
I will say, the Norse had a strong belief in the word, the Orlov and all that.
So I'm going to, because I do not want to miss the opportunities for a few promotional things here, so I'm going to cut off questions at this point. So I want to ask you, Levi is writing a new book for Warlock Press, and I want you to tell us about it and give it a shameless plug.
I'm so excited. I'm finishing up the editing right now. Very, very final tweaks. The book is written. It's done. Then the title is Mother. That's the only title. It has a subtitle, which is Ecstasy, Transformation, and the Great Goddess. So these two books are the two sides of Levi. Like, the art cosmic is the side of me that loves language and loves, tradition and history, and absolutely is in love with, reading Qabalah and all of that. Mother is the work of a cracked heathen mystic. Mother is my exploration of goddess worship. It is a very strident defense of the goddess movement and of contemporary craft. I think there has been an enormous misogynistic uprising in the occult world that does not recognize that the occult history is littered with misogynists, and does not recognize the bravery and brilliance of the contemporary religious witchcraft revival and the goddess movement. And I flat out am going to say both. But it is an exploration of what it means to be transformed in worship. So this is the side of my brain that loves ritual in a magical sense, and Mother is theurgic. It's all about worship, devotion, and transformation of the soul. So it's very different. They're very, very different books, very, very radically different books, but I'm very happy about how different they are.
Which is true, because I've known Levi for many years now, and intellectually, you function very Apollonically, but deep within your spirit, you are actually quite Dionysian.
Oh no, I tell everybody this joke. I've said it on Commodum. I know how it ends for me. It ends with me in a field holding some poor person with a sickle, and the cops are holding the guns up, and I'm just like, it's so beautiful. Why can't you see? The crops will grow. She loves you. It's like my brain loves traditional astrology. My heart just wants to be a pagan mystic. It's just...
That'll be my next book, The Birth of a Serial Killer.
The Birth of the Invisible.
No, my book is on its way too, but you know me. So here is some other shameless plugs. So the Art Cosmic, you can get it at hexwitch.com or omensalem.com. I'm sure there's plenty of other occult shops that sell them. I don't have all the catalog of occult shops of the world. You can get it on amazon.com. You can get it from New Leaf or Ingram if you want to wholesale. Levi will also be teaching a class at Hexfest this year, which he does every year with all the Warlock Press authors. So what class are you teaching this year?
Mine is on methods of attaining ecstatic worship.
Attaining ecstatic worship. That sounds
It has
great.
a better name, but that's the meat of it.
I might show up to that one.
Yeah. Shout, dance, and drum, maybe? I can't remember.
So in your book is set to tentatively be out by Hexfest.
That is the goal.
That is the goal.
That is the goal. The second one, Mother.
Yeah, so far we've accomplished that goal most every time. But yes, it should be out very soon. It's all, one of the great things about having you as an author is he comes kind of as his own editor because he's just really good. Right?
I do my best.
So, but there are some things, like I'll say Christian does a beautiful job with the covers. And the formatting.
I have to give such a shout out to the amount of work that Christian Day did for the art
for all of our books. Yeah.
And that is one of the things I'm most proud of in the Art Cosmic is how beautiful the inside of it
really your
is.
Book was one of the difficult. I remember one night him getting very upset and he was like, I'm never publishing an astrological book again.
I mean,
because there's so many graphs and charts and things. I know. But yes,
they're so pretty though.
He's really good. I mean, in all of our books he did that. So very, very good. So like to you give us some parting words. We've got 10 minutes for you to say whatever you want.
Maybe I should just do the mother bit, right? Just go into full-blown goddess worship.
No,
since it is about the Art Cosmic, I will say, I think astrology is one of those things that has the possibility of being a hokey hobby or a life-changing thing. It can be either. If you just want to read horoscopes in the newspaper, well, nobody uses the newspaper. How old am I, right? I just should be eating my butterscotch candies. Your app or whatever. It can be both.
We all know you're eating licorice candies.
I do. That's my favorite thing. I just ate a bag of black licorice yesterday. I think the biggest thing is that I want to say is I want to go back to what I said in the beginning. All over the world, in multiple cultures, people have believed that everything in existence participates in the divine. This is not just an idea from Neoplatonism, which Brian and I love and have talked about ad nauseum on Covendom. This is also in almost all of the Dharmic traditions of India that are theistic. This is in the Qabalah. This is in Christian mysticism. This is in Gnostic thought. This is in the belief in mana or manna in Australasian cultures. This is, I was reading recently, even the Aztec culture believed in this concept of teotl. Teotl. It's a weird sound that doesn't exist in a lot of languages, which was the divinity present in all things, right? If you really feel that and you're wanting to connect to it, then astrology is not about math and angles and science. It is that, but it's much more than that. It's the concept that everything in the cosmos participates in divinity. God unfurls herself into the universe, right? And anytime you're trying to find the system, whether it's looking at Hebrew letters and associating them with numbers, or saying which stones are going to, correspond to which angels, or it's casting a chart in astrology, what you're doing is looking for the divinity present in something outside of yourself. But the purpose should be to discover the divinity that lives inside yourself, right? As above, so below. The entire point of these systems is to connect to something greater and to feel transformed by that connection. So it doesn't just have to be, my boyfriend is such an asshole because he has Saturn and whatever, right? It's like, you can do that too, where it's like, of course you would say that. You're such a Gemini. That's fine too. It's fun. And I do that too. I love a good astrological meme. But if you are hungry for something a little deeper and you want to see the larger connection, then yeah, investigate it. You'll be surprised what you find.
And so tell us now where people can find you if they want to reach out with any further questions.
You have to handwrite a letter. Beautiful calligraphy, please. No typed. And then I want it sealed in wax, and a bird will show up to your home. And if you give the letter to the bird, it will bring it to me in the woods.
Very good. So once again,
I'm going to end with that because I do not use social media well.
This is a great book for anyone interested in astrology, particularly from the point of view of a witch and an academic, because you can't separate all those things, can you?
No.
And so I think this is a really good book if you are wanting to take astrology into a religious context, an old religious context, really. That is very pertinent to Western occultism now, because one of the gentlemen were asking a question about how you exist in your culture. We've made this a part of our culture.
Oh yeah, it's a huge part of our culture now.
Regardless of where it comes from, and it's so if you're into Western occultism, you really just can't escape it. But it is getting away from Levi's most favorite people, which he calls human secularists.
Secular humanists.
Yes, whatever.
My least favorite people.
That means I don't like you. If he ever calls you that, he doesn't like you.
I'm oddly religious, I know.
So,
it's a cracked mystic in the woods.
You can find it, once again, through any of our stores. I know there are other stores in Salem that sell them. I'm pretty sure Sassy Magic, there's a store across the street, sells all of our books.
I believe so, yeah.
Because Sean Wilde is one of the owners, and he's one of our authors there as well. But they're everywhere. You know, it's impossible to keep track. You know, and I've had the wonderful experience of someone saying, "Oh, I just ran into your book at this occult shop in Seattle." You know,
I know, it's like, very cool.
Because we don't know who's buying them all, because we don't run Ingram and Newleaf. So that's who does the wholesaling. You know, we get it through them. So we're not wholesalers right now with 5 titles. I don't know if I'd ever want to be a wholesaler.
We are special.
And Levi and I will be back on Covendom. Probably, I'm guessing, we haven't exactly scheduled the date, but it'll be scheduled within a month. So,
and this brick back wall is a very 90s stand-up comic, so I'm excited about that.
They probably all thought it was real.
I know. I'm very excited about this, though. Look at this.
Well, because it's a French Quarter kind of look.
It's a theme. I love it.
Do you know our first condo that was actually in the inside of the house is how that looked?
Oh, yeah. It's very popular down here.
But yeah,
so thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Levi will be doing our last interview of the year. Yes, until new books come out. So might be doing a couple more interviews.
Who will I be interviewing?
You'll be interviewing Christian.
You would have loved that. You would have appreciated that choice.
Anyway, thank you all for chiming in. If you have any further questions, you can leave them in the comments. This is on both Facebook and YouTube, and so Levi can go back and find them, or you can just send him, slide into his DMs on Facebook.
Remember the bird.
He may eveventually get back to you.
I know.
All right. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you. Have a great evening.